For over a year, Prime Minister Donald Tusk assured the Polish public that Poland would not be forced to accept illegal migrants. However, this narrative is beginning to fall apart. German politicians say explicitly that Poland will be forced to take in migrants deported from Germany. Today, a special facility was opened in Eisenhüttenstadt. The location is no coincidence, as it is near the Polish border. Eisenhüttenstadt. It is here, just by the Polish border, that the Germans have opened a centre for illegal migrants. There is no shortage of newcomers from Africa and the Middle East there.
Do
you want to stay in Germany or be in Poland? I came here and now I don't know what will happen to me.
In case you have...
They assured me that if I get into a European country, if my application is rejected, I won't have to go back home. Germany, under the so-called Dublin III regulation, intends to send back migrants to other European Union countries. And from this centre, the closest destination is Poland. German politicians say this explicitly. All migrants will be gathered in one central location. Thanks to their proximity to the Polish border, they will be able to be sent back there quickly. As we read in the German media, there are countries in Europe that do not agree to the German dictates. One of them is Italy. Poland under Donald Tusk is a different story, reportedly opening its arms wide to newcomers from across the German border. Italy has accepted only 4 migrants from us. Poland is completely different. They accept everyone. This completely debunks the narrative of Donald Tusk, who this whole time has been arguing that Poland would not be forced to accept anyone. Poland will not accept any migrants under the Migration Pact. The Prime Minister bizarrely claimed to oppose the Migration Pact while arguing that Poland would benefit from it. Poland will be a beneficiary of the Migration Pact. All the while, German services continue to dump illegal migrants on Polish territory. Tusk's government pretends to do something and say some stern words. However, this is mere posturing, as German Chancellor Scholz admitted personally. Donald Tusk said that the security of the Polish and German border is non-negotiable and that this migration agreement will not be implemented. But he will implement it, and we will benefit from it. This policy of Donald Tusk should not surprise anyone. It was he who, during his time as President of the European Council, threatened that Poland would face sanctions for not taking in illegal migrants. This will inevitably involve certain consequences. There are rules in Europe. It was also his political camp, as well as his friendly media, that did what they could to discourage Poles from participating in a referendum, which could have tipped the scales in favour of Poland rejecting the Migration Pact. I solemnly annul this referendum. And now, after more than 14 months of Donald Tusk's government, this entire immigration narrative has finally unravelled. Everything Tusk does is for praise, to get a pat on the back from the Europeans. Just look at those praises from Germany, that Italians don't accept migrants, but fortunately there is the laid-back, obedient Donald Tusk, who accepts everyone. Donald Tusk, unlike Giorgia Meloni, unhesitatingly agrees to the Germans' demands. He tells voters one thing, then turns round and does another. Special centres for the integration of foreigners are already being set up all over Poland. Now, the Polish people know who is to be housed in them.
Let me conclude, and this becomes difficult.
The truth hurts. The head of the Munich Security Conference cried as he spoke. The words of US Vice President J.D. Vance about the moral decline of European elites affected him so much that he had to leave the stage. Only when patted on the back by like-minded colleagues did he regain his composure.
After the speech of Vice President Vance on Friday, we have to fear that our common value base is not that common anymore. I'm very grateful.
Liberal politicians applauded him at the time, but isn't this precisely the best picture of what Vance was talking about, that Europe today has weak leaders?
The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America.
But how to live if the American vice president comes and criticizes? The tears of this German liberal, I think, are a testimony to the fact that Europe is simply in a pit, that this is a testimony to the decline of Europe. He reminded me here, I think, of some kind of collective cry. Hołownia, who also cried so much over this constitution, the constitution by them is simply violated at almost every step. Christoph Huygens is crying now, but when in 2018, during his first presidential term, Donald Trump warned Germany at the United Nations about Europe's dependence on Russian gas, it was Huygens who laughed mockingly at the American leader. The Russian-German gas deal not only jeopardized the security of the people of our continent, but also fueled the Russian war machine. This is the man who, while serving as Germany's ambassador to the United Nations in 2018, publicly ridiculed President Trump's talk of what later came to be true. After all, the war in Ukraine showed exactly what Trump was talking about, namely, the faithless entrusting of the German and European economies to hydrocarbons from Russia, making much of Europe completely controllable by Putin, by Russia. And Huygens himself is a very interesting figure. He has been Chancellor Angela Merkel's advisor on foreign and security affairs since 2005. He is one behind some of the worst decisions for the people of Europe, the gas deal with Russia and the open door policy for illegal Islamic immigrants, who literally flooded Europe under Merkel, and we know very well how that ended. He may have cried over his own mistakes because he, as an advisor to Chancellor Merkel on many key issues related to security, made huge mistakes that deserve to be wept over today. J.D. Vance made it clear, and he was speaking to all those left liberal leaders who have opened the doors wide to illegal immigrants, that the citizens of their countries do not want to be afraid to take to the streets. They are fed up with fear and terror.
No voter on this continent went to the ballot box to open the floodgates to millions of unvetted immigrants. But you know what they did vote for? In England, they voted for Brexit, and agree or disagree, they voted for it. And more all over Europe, they're voting for political leaders who promise to put an end to out-of-control migration. Now, I happen to agree with a lot of these concerns, but you don't have to agree with me. I just think that people care about their homes, they care about their dreams, they care about their safety and their capacity to provide for themselves and their children. And they're smart.
And as J.D. Vance stressed, to build a strong country, you need broad popular support, which the governments of neither France, Spain, Germany, nor Poland have. That's why basic democratic values like freedom of speech are violated everywhere. In Germany, it is forbidden to talk about crimes committed by illegal immigrants. And in the United Kingdom, you may be arrested for praying in a public place.
And across Europe, free speech, I fear, is in retreat. And in the interest of comedy, my friends, but also in the interest of truth, I will admit that sometimes the loudest voices for censorship have come not from within Europe, but from within my own country, where the prior administration threatened and bullied social media companies to censor so-called misinformation.
J.D. Vance just didn't talk about fundamental values, he led by example. The Munich Security Conference was a lesson in diplomacy for left liberal politicians, but above all, decency.
150,000 Russian troops are expected to hit Belarusian training grounds this year as part of the Zapad 2025 maneuvers. Kyiv warns that this is a scenario similar to the one 3 years ago, when some Russian units from Belarusian territory attacked Ukraine. This time, however, it may not be about Kyiv, but about destabilizing NATO's eastern flank. Zapad 2021, the largest maneuvers in Eastern Europe since the collapse of the Soviet Union. 200,000 soldiers, thousands of units of equipment, a large part of them on the territory of Belarus. It was in this way, under the nose of NATO, that Putin organized a Russian military deception, sometimes known as Maskirovka, concentrating forces that a few months later took part in the first strike on Ukraine. This history may repeat itself, according to Kyiv, later this year.
Now we see how he's preparing to train 150,000 people, mostly on the territory of Belarus, to show it for the world that it's just training, that is usually he's doing the same usually, but it's not truth. From such point, he began the occupation 3 years ago. Full-scale war, he began from some symbolic trainings and etc.
The information gained by Ukrainian intelligence has already been learned in detail by Kyiv's closest allies, including the Americans.
There is a high risk that he can do the same, maybe not, God bless not, And maybe before it, President Trump and the allies will stop him.
The Zapad maneuvers in 2025 are expected to be a demonstration of Russian reconstitution capabilities. Optimists assumed that sanctions and isolation would lead Russia to economic collapse. However, what some analysts warned of has happened. The Kremlin has switched its economy to war mode and, with the help of China, is able to rebuild its potential.
And if we get a bad deal, it would only mean that we will see the president of Russia high-fiving with the leaders of North Korea, Iran and China. And we cannot accept that. That would be geopolitically a big mistake.
Minsk does not want to lose in the New Deal. Hence the somewhat, however, seeking contact with the West may be risky, especially since Putin still wants to use Belarus to destabilize NATO's eastern flank. Lukashenko is also trying to strike a deal with Vladimir Putin on a timetable for the withdrawal of Russian forces from the training ground after the Zapad exercises are over, so that this number of Russian forces in Belarus will be within security limits, both for Lukashenko and for its NATO neighbors. Regardless of the course of the Washington-Kiev-Moscow talks, Putin will be prepared for Variant B, in which no agreement is reached, and the situation in the region escalates. Europe must also be ready for such a scenario, hence such unequivocal pressure from both the Pentagon and NATO headquarters for a significant increase in defense spending.
This could be the end of gas stoves in Europe. Financial support for their purchase has already been discontinued, and in 5 years, it will be illegal to install them in new buildings. This is a decision by the European Union that could have a significant impact on the household budgets of Polish families. There is no lack of controversial regulations introduced by the EU. In early February, the European Commission allowed insect larvae to be added to food products, from bread to dairy. From banning the sale of new gas-powered cars, to requiring the modernization of buildings, or even promoting the consumption of insects as a source of protein, the European Union's ideas are controversial, to say the least. Are they going to ban and prescribe what we should do? A scandal. I think this is all a setup. All the things that the EU is restricting are connected to Germany. Remember when they wanted to introduce Teflon cookers? It was all produced by Germany and planned in advance. Now, the European Union is introducing changes that will force the phasing out of gas use in new buildings. Starting this year, the subsidy rules for gas stoves will become less favorable, and from 2030 onward, all new buildings will have to use renewable energy sources. Under the Clean Air program, the European Union subsidized the Polish people to replace coal stoves with gas ones. Today, we are learning that we need to move away from gas stoves. This means additional expenses for households. Gas is the main source of heat for many Polish households. Replacing gas stoves also entails higher costs, which many households may find difficult to bear, especially those that have already benefited from these subsidies. Replacing gas stoves, even with modern ones, involves costs that may be difficult for many households to bear, especially those that have already benefited from subsidies and installed gas stoves. This is not the end of the controversy. The European Union has introduced a new carbon emission standard that says the average emissions of new cars must not exceed 93.6 grams per kilometer. This means that manufacturers will adapt their cars so that the average emissions of their fleet do not exceed this limit. In practice, this means an increase in the price of internal combustion cars and pressure on manufacturers to sell more electric cars. Consumers will feel these changes.
Samochody, które w 2025 roku wyjadą z linii produkcyjnej, będą droższe około...
Cars that roll off the assembly line in 2025 will be about 1,500 euros more expensive. And why? Because the European Union has already imposed a penalty on manufacturers of combustion cars as a result of the tax. The money will go into the European Commission's budget to burn off EU debt. In addition to energy policy changes, the European Union has also decided to allow the consumption of worms, which are seen as an alternative source of protein. Food manufacturers will be able to add mealworm larvae powder to breads, cheeses, and jams, starting this month. I can't imagine. Eating worms. We need to set that straight. They can eat bugs themselves if they want to. This is an absurd and bizarre issue. First of all, in our culture, it is not acceptable to give people worms to eat. Secondly, there are health concerns. We do not know where these worms have been. Many people believe that the European Union's introduction of ever tighter restrictions is actually a move to limit people's freedom. In America, Donald Trump's policy is to oppose the green madness. Meanwhile, the Polish government is submitting to EU norms. The results of this green policy are more expensive cars, rising energy prices, and pain for household budgets. Faced with these challenges, the question is whether Poland should follow the EU's climate policy, or rather, following Trump's example, take care of its own country's well-being.